IELTS speaking exam is often misunderstood. The misconception is that the examiner is sitting there counting your mistakes and deducting marks for each of them. That's not how it works. IELTS is an exam that rewards for positives more than it penalizes for negatives, such as grammar mistakes. Examiners use 4 criteria to assess your speaking skills. Let's talk about each of them and what you can do to push your score up. It's Asia. Let's get started. The first criterion is fluency and coherence. Yes, you need to show you can speak fluently. Even if you're not a chatty person, make the most of every opportunity to interact with the examiner right from the beginning. Good morning, my name is Jane Brown. Could you tell me your full name, please? Good morning, nice to meet you. My name is Asia. We know that IELTS speaking is not the same as a real conversation because even in part 3, it's not two-way. The examiner asks questions and you answer them. But starting off being confident and friendly will make the examiner's task easier. Here is the first tip. Extend your answers. What the examiner is hoping for is your ability to develop any topic as fully as you need to speak with hardly any hesitation, not to repeat yourself too much, and of course, to join up what you say with appropriate connecting words and phrases. It's a lot to ask, and your performance can suffer if you don't extend your answers enough, making yourself appear less fluent. In part 1, it's when our answers are too short. Would you like to learn more about the stars and planets? No, not really. It's not a subject I find interesting. Why not? The examiner will ask for more information with a why not question, but it's better to go into detail by explaining yourself first. No, not really. It's not a subject I've ever found particularly interesting. Perhaps because my main interests have always been in the humanities. As I told you, I studied psychology and now work in human resources. And to be honest, I'm not a sci-fi fan. So, one vital key to improved performance is extending your answers. Always try to add an explanation whenever you can, or an example to put what you're saying into context. In part 1, your answers should be about 20 to 30 seconds, and you can talk about yourself. While in part 3, you have up to a minute for each answer, so it's even more important to extend them. However, in part 3, you have to talk in general terms, not about yourself. Listen to this. How important is it for advertisers to tell the truth in advertisements? Well, I guess advertisers should be honest and tell customers exactly what they're buying, because if not, they would lose trust in the product and the company that makes it. Of course, those customers most likely would never come back to buy the same product again in the future. Besides that, there's always the risk of someone suing the company. I think there are laws about that in the USA. I mean, being sued is certainly not good for the lasting image of a company. This is a solid part 3 answer. There are different ways to extend your answers, which we've discussed in this video, and I'll link it in the description. What about part 2? This is the section where you receive a cue card with a topic and are expected to speak for between 1 and 2 minutes. For the best results, aim to speak for the entire 2 minutes until the examiner stops you. This will give you more time to demonstrate your fluency, vocabulary, and grammar skills. And don't worry if you don't finish your talk before the time runs out. What's important in part 2 is to develop your talk coherently, logically, link your ideas and sentences together. Here is a classic structure you can use for your part 2 topic. So our topic is to describe a person who likes to grow plants. Not an easy one, huh? But here's what you can do about it. The first bullet point is to say who the person is. So start by introducing the person. Next, discuss how you know the person. And again, I have a full paragraph about it. Similarly, you can dedicate a paragraph to what types of plants the person grows and why growing plants is important. You can pause the video to read the answer and see how it's organized. I'll also link the video about this answer and how to tackle part 2 cue cards when you don't know what to say. Now, the next step to improve your fluency and coherence score is to use pauses and time to think phrases. We're talking about answering lots of questions. Some of these, especially in part 3, may not be so easy to answer without pausing for a moment to gather your thoughts. How long is a pause in IELTS? That's an important question. Examiners work on a 5-second silence. In part 2, for example, a 5-second silence can prompt the question, "Is there anything else you tell me about this?" In part 3, a pause to think for a moment is perfectly natural. That question we just looked at about truth in advertising is a good example of that. It began with a simple, "Well, I guess." But you can also say a little more, a phrase that will not only give you some time to think, but also impress the examiner with your skill at using expressions that keep the dialogue flowing. Here are some examples. To be honest, well, to tell you the truth, in my opinion, I guess, if you ask me. Others make a comment on how much you know about the topic. This is not something I know a lot about, but I've never given this very much thought, but I've never thought about that before. All these phrases sound perfectly natural. They're part of the ways we keep conversations going. You know, an examiner told me that test takers often overuse one phrase in these situations. This is not a good idea. Learn and feel comfortable with several of these time to think phrases. By the way, can you guess what the most overused phrase is? That's an interesting question. No problem using it once, but once is enough. And try to say it in a situation where the question is, interesting. The second skill examiners assess is your lexical resource, or put simply, vocabulary. According to the IELTS band descriptors that examiners use, you need a wide range of vocabulary and some less common and idiomatic words and phrases. On top of that, you need to be able to paraphrase, to explain things in your own words. I have several tips to help you when it comes to lexical resource. My first tip is to use words you know, which really means don't try to sound like a dictionary. Don't try to impress the examiner with words you don't often use in conversation. Keep it simple. That doesn't mean not to use specialized vocabulary, but don't sound too technical. It will give the impression that you've memorized what you're saying, and examiners don't want to hear that. Here's an example. Where do you work? As a geophysicist working for an international exploration company, I'm mainly involved in carrying out seismic wave measurements, which means transmitting the output from a... This sounds like a memorized answer. Be natural. Make sure the examiner is following you, like this. I'm a geophysicist. I collect data on different types of what we call seismic waves, like kind of earth movements. And with that data, we can know what's under the surface, like oil or gas. That's how people talk. The language is simpler, but the answer is so much better. Let's go on to idiomatic language. Idioms can be tricky. Of course, if you know and feel comfortable using some idiomatic expressions, feel free to use them. For example, you might have learned the expression under the weather to mean not feeling well. If you're sure you can use it in the right place and at the right time, go ahead. How about if you're asked to describe a time when you were very busy in part 2 and you say this? It was this time last year, in fact. I was studying so hard for my final exams at university, but I'd also been feeling a bit under the weather with some kind of flu. This is fine, but here's a word of warning. An examiner friend of mine told me of a case where a test taker had used this same expression about 5 times. Can you guess one of the most overused idiomatic expressions? In a nutshell, which means in short or to sum up. Please don't overdo it. The same could be said for expressions that have become cliches. Something that has become so overused with time that it no longer has an impact and even might sound old-fashioned. Do we say these days things like, as old as the hills, or it trains cats and dogs? Not really. At least if the examiner asks you about the weather in your country, it's better to say that you often have tropical downpours in summer. No cats, no dogs. Right, let's move on. One of the worst things that happened to me in the speaking test is when I forgot the word I needed in the middle of the sentence. It feels quite embarrassing. What's the solution? Try not to get stuck. Look for a simple paraphrase. Imagine in a part 2 topic, describe your ideal home, you could say this. Yes, it would have all along the front of the house a place where you can sit and look at the view. What's the missing word? Veranda, or maybe porch. But here it's a place outside where you can sit. A short description. We could also use a word we know is not the right one, but has some similarities. A kind of balcony on the ground floor. The next skill is your grammar. How to improve your performance here? Examiners assess if you use a variety of grammatical structures and how accurately you do this, or how often you make mistakes. And we all make mistakes. Very fluent speakers, even native speakers, make mistakes we usually call slips. Here is a very common one. There's a lot of opportunities. When you're starting to say there is, you may not yet know what you're gonna say next. And as a result, you end up with a sentence like this. It's a slip. If you do notice you've made a mistake, don't be afraid to correct it straight away. I've been to Paris last year. That's when I went there. At the same time, there's no magic wand to avoid mistakes. I still make them occasionally. Don't let the fear of making mistakes paralyze you. Expressing your thoughts is more important. Examiners also assess how many complex structures you use. By complex, I mean conditional sentences with if, modal verbs such as may, might, could, as well as the passive voice, and many other structures. I don't think you really have time to think, what grammatical structure should I use here? Let me add a past perfect tense. So use what you know. Now for the 4th category, pronunciation. The truth is, most of us will always speak English with an accent. Sometimes a very noticeable one, sometimes not. This is nothing to worry about. The examiner wants you to speak clearly and be easily understood, even though you may mispronounce an occasional word. What about speed? You don't want to speak too slowly, but that's often not something you can help. Or too fast. Don't think that if you just keep on talking and talking and talking, you're going to get a high score. No, articulate words clearly. A third important aspect is how you express meaning, feelings, and opinions through stress. The way you emphasize certain words to express what you want to say. Every language has its own stress patterns. And one way to sound English, if you like, is to imitate those patterns. One problem you may recognize is speaking in a kind of monotone. If your voice is quite flat, never going up or down too much, and not stressing the key words. Let's take a simple example. Listen to this. Notice which words are stressed. Does the student slow down a little at any point? It was in my last year at school, and I was chosen to give the graduation speech in front of my classmates, teachers, and parents. Maybe it sounded a little like this. The words in capitals are stressed, and the dots between words mean slowing down a little. Articles and prepositions are not pronounced as clearly as the words that carry the main meaning. You may not feel confident doing this, and it may feel like you are doing too much or acting. And you know, IELTS speaking test is a performance, and you should practice for it to rehearse just like actors. It's important that you study model answers and practice answering typical questions from all three parts of the test. It's a great idea to record your test practices and listen to yourself. Or work with a speaking partner. Here is how you can find one. If you're on Telegram, we have hundreds of students looking for partners every month. Just open your app, search for Fastrack IELTS, click in the top right corner and search for #partner. We publish a new post every month, and that's a great place to connect. And at the top of the channel, you can see recent questions for your practice. And believe me, it does work when you listen to model answers or other sources of spoken English and imitate what you hear. I actually have a video where you can listen to it and repeat IELTS speaking answers after my friend Alex, who has beautiful British pronunciation. You can try it right here. And thank you so much for watching me today. Good luck with your preparation and your exam. Bye!